that even Scrooge and the Grinch are happy about it.
There wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have in this country are because of the Second Amendment, and never ever forget that.
She's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats, and they can't skip over the first black woman vice president with the whitest man ever in history, Gavin Newsom.
It's time that we, the people, take this country back.
And if you try to transition a child, you are guilty of child abuse, and every doctor, every nurse, every clinician that is helping that is culpable in that crime.
This thing is so full of pork that even Scrooge and the Grinch are happy about it.
There wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have in this country are because of the Second Amendment, and never ever forget that.
She's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats, and they can't skip over the first black woman vice president with the whitest man ever in history, Gavin Newsom.
It's time that we, the people, take this country back.
And if you try to transition a child, you are guilty of child abuse, and every doctor, every nurse, every clinician that is helping that is culpable in that crime.
This thing is so full of pork that even Scrooge and the Grinch are happy about it.
There wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have in this country are because of the Second Amendment, and never ever forget that.
She's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats, and they can't skip over the first black woman vice president with the whitest man ever in history, Gavin Newsom.
It's time that we, the people, take this country back.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 48 of Restoring the Republic. And the topic today or tonight is British invasion. Is Great Britain being invaded? Now, I'm here with my good friend, my guest, Raheem Kassam. Now, look, let's be honest. Immigration, the illegal migration across Europe has had dire consequences. We've seen it in London and Paris. You look at Rome when you have 3, 6, perhaps 10% of the population, especially when it comes to our women and children, committing anywhere from 40 to 60% of the sex crimes, depending on the city that we're talking about. And so what I want, obviously the King is coming to the Capitol Hill tonight, today, and you are my guest. But so introduce yourself to the audience, and then let's talk about this invasion. Then I also want to talk about a couple of the books that you've written several years ago, but unfortunately have come to pass. So take it away.
Right, well, firstly, thank you very much, not just for having me on your show, but mostly as a Brit for having me at the joint session today of Congress. You know, I was at the British Embassy last night when the King arrived there, was at the White House this morning, front row, by the way, which I was very, very chuffed about, to see the King and to hear the President's remarks, which were very poignant, actually, about the Anglo-Saxon history of our two nations, right? He didn't shy away from a lot of the truths that our politicians shy away from about where the country comes from and how these two countries have developed together. You know, he made such a poignant remark that the redcoats and the rebels, as we call them, became known as the Tommies and the GIs, you know, in the First and Second World Wars. And so we have this mutual track. And right now we also have a mutual track of being deeply concerned about what's going on with our changing demographics. And I've been talking about this now for, nearly 15 years, I think. A lot of your audience, I think, would have heard of the grooming gang scandal that we can get into in the UK. But I remember writing about that over a decade ago and being told by the mainstream media and establishment that I was Islamophobic and racist and making it up and all of this stuff. Of course, it's all come to pass, and the things that I wrote in those books has all come to pass. But I really cut my teeth in conservative politics in the United Kingdom. Started there about 2008 and started to visit the US and really get a taste. I would visit CPACs and really get a taste, and this was at the time of the Tea Party, of how Americans weren't afraid to wear their politics on their sleeve. They weren't shy and bashful about saying what they thought was happening in their neighborhoods and in their country. And we have been. Right. You know, the British public has been too overly polite, and unfortunately, when you're that polite, you're complicit in a lot of the things that have been going on. But I can report quite happily to you that is changing in real time, and it's changing because of a lot of people. You've obviously spoken with Tommy Robinson in the past, Nigel Farage. There are all of these characters who have come up in British politics in the last 10, 15, 20 years who have been saying enough is enough. And now if you look at the public opinion polling, we have local elections going on. It's the equivalent of the midterms on May the 7th, and I'm actually flying over there tomorrow to go and take part in them. The public opinion polling shows that the Reform Party, which is Nigel Farage's party, has led in the last 250 national polls. So the public now is at its wit's end. It does take time sometimes for these things to happen. Right. But the public now is at its wit's end with globalism, with declinism, with mass migration, and of course everything that comes along with it. And what's come along with it is not just the changing nature of our communities. It's violence. You know, it's extreme violence in some cases. Sure. Horrifying stories in small towns across the country. You know, people think about the grooming gang scandal and the mass rape that has gone on of predominantly white young girls. That's right. And you're seeing it towns. In the UK, you're seeing it in France, you're seeing it in Denmark, you're seeing it in Italy. Yeah. So this has now become, an infection, a crisis, I would argue. And I've been very vocal on this. Coming to the States, and I want to talk a little more about your background because you've been you mentioned the Tea Party, you've been part of the conservative movement here in the States. You've got a business in town that has become one of the go-to spots for the MAGA movement. But so when you look here in the U.S., we had 4 terror attacks in March, and the 1st, the 7th, and 2 on the 12th, and they were all Muslim. And I was very vocal about the fact that they were Muslim and that they were targeting Americans. And of course, the media here in the U.S. and they internationally excoriated me, calling me a racist and all sorts of names. And so what did we do? We got louder. Right? Because now we're having this conversation that, Europe, I would argue, whether it's 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, you guys are ahead of us in this mistake. So we can learn from you. We can learn from the UK. And because we're seeing it here in the US. And so look, I said, you know what? Prove me wrong. So I wrote an open letter to the roughly 3,000 mosques in the United States. I said, I will meet with any imam who's willing to condemn the attacks, the 4 terror attacks on U.S. soil. You had the Michigan car ramming and shooting at the synagogue. You had the attempted bombing in New York. You had the shooting in Virginia. You had the shooting in Texas, to jog your memories. And I said, if you'll condemn the violence to the imams, to the mosque, and you'll disavow the attackers, I will meet with you. I'll come to your communities. I will meet with you. And of the 3,000 that we reached out to, you want to know how many were willing to condemn the violence against Americans and to disavow the attackers? I imagine it was quite a round number. It was 0, right? Now, and let's be honest.
If a Christian, if a Jew, if a Hindu or Buddhist, both of which are pacifists, but if any of those aforementioned religions killed in the name of God, you wouldn't have to ask the religious leaders to stand up and say that is not representative of who we are in our community at large, right? It would be instinctive. But here in the U.S., the Muslim community as a whole and the mosques and the imams have been silent in defending America, silent in condemning the violence, and silent in saying this is not who we are. So you can't be a religion of peace when Americans are being attacked and killed on U.S. soil. You're too cowardly to say anything about it. And so going back to you, and obviously this is a hot button issue for me because I'm seeing it as a member of Homeland Security, as the chairman of cyber. I get classified security briefings that most members of Congress don't get, and we have a problem in this country. We just caught an Iranian Hezbollah sniper in Alabama, right? And he wasn't in Chicago because there's already one of him in Chicago. He wasn't in New York because they already have terrorists in New York. He wasn't in D.C. here in our capital where we just had an attempted assassination of the president because they have terrorists there. They're in rural America now, and we know this. And so let's learn from the UK. But before we get into all of that, I want people to understand a little more about you. So you're from over there.
Yeah.
You came here. Involved in the Tea Party.
Yep.
Now tell us a little more about your political activity in the U.S. And then again, like you said, you started one of the go-to restaurants slash pub bar, whatever you want to call it,
sure.
Here on Capitol Hill for the MAGA movement.
Yeah, look, I mean, I set up Breitbart's London bureau under Steve Bannon in 2013, and that's how I sort of, became formally acquainted with more American politics, and I would be on the Breitbart News radio show every morning and doing very much this, by the way, talking about what was going on in Europe, the mass migration, Angela Merkel's big 2015 mass migration. People will remember where she said, "Come, everybody, we can handle it, we can manage it." And of course, you look at the statistics today and how many of those people that emigrated to Germany, in most part illegally, right, have jobs.
Right.
What percentage is on welfare? I mean, the majority is on welfare. Most don't have jobs. They mostly are overrepresented in almost every criminal category possible. By a long way, by the way, not 51% or 52%. I mean, we're talking 70, 80%, right, over representation in those things. And, I watched this growing up because my parents were Muslim Indian immigrants into the United Kingdom. But they were subject to the British Empire when they had lived in India. And so they came wanting to be British and wanting their children to be British, wanting to assimilate, wanting to, contribute. They weren't welfare recipients.
Right.
They were job creators. They tried their hardest. And more than anything, they did it at a time when migration was at manageable numbers. The number of people that enter Britain every year at the moment is 1 million. They emigrated when it was about 20,000 into the country. And so I grew up against the backdrop of all of that, with that in my heart, and threw myself into this cause to actually warn people. And people always ask me, well, why are you in America? Because I'm trying to warn Americans, sort of like a reverse Paul Revere,
we won, by the way.
Right. The jihadists are coming. Right? And that was why I did the book in 2016, No-Go Zones, where I went to Arab and Muslim-dominated neighborhoods across Europe and in the US, and just wrote it up fairly. I was even on CNN talking about it. They said it was perfectly fairly written. I was on MSNBC talking about it. Nobody actually came after me because it was so academically rigorous that they've never been able to deny anything that I put in there. And one of the things that you said is really interesting to me, because I was in San Bernardino. You remember there was a terror attack in San Bernardino a long time ago now, 2017 or 2018. Happened to be in California at the time. And so what I did is all the reporters, they didn't know what they were doing. I went to the mosques and I said the exact same thing that you said to the imams. I said, do you condemn this? And do you preach certain verses of the Quran that are in the Quran that say, you know, strike the necks of the unbelievers, treat the Christians and the Jews like dogs and animals and kafar and all of that stuff. And not a single one of them would condemn it, would distance themselves from it, would say that's not what we believe. That may have been written like this, but the Quran is abrogated, and the later passages, that's what I would say if I was in their position, say, you know, the later passages abrogate the earlier passages, so we don't teach that. They wouldn't. They just wouldn't do any of it. So I kind of took it upon myself to become a voice for that. Happens that, you know, moving to Washington, D.C. in 2016, we voted for Brexit, and I Brexited myself in the same year, came over, helped the Trump campaign, helped the Trump movement, became an editor of Breitbart US, took over Human Events, Reagan's old favorite magazine, sold that, set up a new publication, The National Pulse, which is still going today. People should check it out at thenationalpulse.com. And then started up this restaurant on Capitol Hill, because in the first Trump administration, we all had somewhere to go, which was the old Trump Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue.
That's right.
It's where we'd all coalesce, talk, meet, network, best practice, how to fight the left together. They sold that hotel and there was nowhere for people to go, or there was going to be nowhere for people to go in the second Trump term. So we just thought, well, hey, there's this spot on Capitol Hill, walking distance from the Capitol building itself. Let's do it. And it has become an overnight raging pain in my butt.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the nature of the restaurant business, right? But, you know, Butterworth's has become a staple for, I mean, I see cabinet members, Town Hall just had a big reception upstairs. I mean, it's a place to go to mingle with the MAGA movement. But you know, you're unique. And full disclosure, we're friends, right? So I have a bias. But you know, Bannon, so Tea Party, Bannon, Trump, right? You know, Breitbart. Like you have been at the center of really this MAGA conservative movement, and quite frankly, takeover in Washington D.C. really from the beginning.
Yeah.
And for you to come from the UK, and again, like Paul Revere, to say, hey, you know, they're coming,
Yeah,
right? And so I want to talk a little bit about, and it's unfortunate, and obviously. This has become one of the primary issues that I talk about. I'm on financial services, which is banking. That's the nerd committee. You know, it is what it is, but it's important to our economy, especially interest rates, and that's one of the things that I work on. Then a Homeland Security, and I'm specifically chairman of cyber and AI. And with that chairmanship, you know, I get security briefings, classified security briefings, that typically only chairmen of some of your bigger committees and or the intel community get. And or the Intel committee gets, and so you know I'm neck deep in the constant assaults from China, you know what's going on with Russia and Eastern Europe, etc. But then there's this other bucket, and it is Islam, and it is this Islamification. And look, I understand there's good people in every religion around the world, but when you have a religion that is unwilling to condemn violence, then I've got a problem with that. When Americans are being killed, and again, some people will say, well, you're Islamophobic. Look, if it was a Hindu church, if it was a Buddhist temple, if it was a Jewish synagogue that was, condoning violence by their silence, I would speak up, right? Yeah. Americans should be safe. Yeah. The president, I mean, I was in the ballroom when they tried to kill the president again. And so this has become the norm for the left. Meanwhile, we're trying to have an honest conversation about what you've seen in your country, where, I mean, it seems like it's almost every day where a 13 or 14-year-old girl, sometimes boys, but girls in particular, are raped or gang raped across Europe. And it's day in and day out. And some of the crimes, it's horrific. It is absolutely horrific, and unfortunately, because of my role, I get that information, and it pisses me off.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, they're coming here.
Right.
They are here.
Right.
Condemn the daggum violence.
Yeah, look, I mean, not to get too kind of emotional about it, but I've lost friends to Islamic terror attacks. You know, I've lost one of my best friends was blown up in Kabul. In an Islamic terror attack. I've had friends who have been stabbed dozens of times, not on separate occasions, like at once, stabbed dozens of times, and survived, by the way, by Islamic terrorists. So it really means something to me, and it means sort of more coming from me as well. I think because, when I graduated college, I went to the University of Westminster, and I said to my teachers, my tutors, and the university leadership, I said, I think we've got a big radical Islam problem here on campus. And bear in mind, at the time, I would have still described myself as a practicing Muslim. So I was taking a step into a very dangerous place.
Sure.
Apostasy is punishable by death in Islam.
That's right.
And I've had enough death threats as a result of my apostasy to know it. I've had condemnations by entities funded by the government of Iran, by the way, to bring it into a contemporaneous level. But I was going to an Islamic Society meeting when I was in college because I was being guilt tripped by one of these guys who said, come on, brother, you're not really a Muslim if you don't come to this meeting. And I was walking up the steps to that Islamic Society meeting. Some guy started walking down the stairs towards me, said, don't go in there. I said, why not? I promised him I'd go in there. He said, they're watching videos of 9/11, they're clapping and they're cheering. And I turned on my heel, just walked away. I actually went to the pub. And I've never left. That was a real pivotal moment for me. And of course, I tried to report it. I set up a group that actually monitored Islamic radicalization on university campuses. That was my first job out of university. And we were called all sorts of things by the mainstream media, right? A couple of years later, it comes out that Jihadi John, the ISIS executioner, was 2 years below me at the University of Westminster.
Wow.
And I said, I told you that was going on our campus, and you said nothing. You wanted nothing to do with it. So as far as I'm concerned, all of the blood that was spilled by Jihadi John is on the hands of the people who refused to deal with this at the time. And I just couldn't, for my conscience's sake, not speak up about something like that. The other book that I've brought for you here is called Enoch Was Right. It's about a British parliamentarian called Enoch Powell from the 50s, 60s and 70s, possibly the greatest prime minister that we never had. But he gave a speech in 1968 called what was become known as the Rivers of Blood speech, where he warned that if we keep allowing mass migration to happen at mass scale, then we will have a scenario on our hands where communities are constantly clashing.
That's right.
And you see that now in major cities. It's not in pockets of London. It's in widespread areas, in Birmingham, in Manchester, in Leeds, in Bradford, all across the country. This is happening.
Well, you mentioned Birmingham, right? Britain's second largest city is now minority white. Because of this mass migration. And look, I understand that with the EU and people can move to and from, but when migration results in, mass crime, then you're importing the wrong people. So, and I'm shooting from the hip here, but I'll get this stats pretty close, right? But roughly 300,000 Afghanis in the U.S., 200,000 of them came in under Biden. Somewhere between 48 and 52% of those Afghanis are on food stamps. Somewhere between 76 and 78% of them are on free health care. So as you said, your parents migrated to the UK. They wanted to be a part. They wanted to be British. They wanted to have a job. They wanted to contribute to society. They sent you to university. You've educated yourself. You've been part of literally the MAGA takeover of DC and the country. And these Afghanis come here and crime goes up. They get free food. They get free health care. And the media expects me to be quiet about that?
Look, you don't have to tell me about this. Right? Every year I have to re-up my visa in the United States. And it costs time and it costs at least 10 grand every time. Right, and I do things all the legal way, and these guys come over and they get everything for free. Yeah. And I just think to myself, gosh, maybe next year I'll just come in via the southern border.
Yeah, but we could drive down and come back and suddenly, you get asylum.
I'll get a cell phone, I'll get a house, I'll get all sorts
free
of
healthcare.
But look, it's like my parents broke their backs to raise us the right way, and bring us up in a country where we felt like we were part of it and we spoke the language. You think about now. These communities all across England. They don't even speak English.
Yeah.
We have to have translation on public street signs into Urdu, into Bengali, into Gujarati, into Arabic. All of these, and think about the toll it takes. So we have a socialised healthcare service. You know, the National Health Service is paid for by the taxpayer out of general taxation. And, you know, we're always talking about how it's the envy of the West. I mean, I've yet to meet anybody outside of the UK who thinks it's a good idea. But this is how it's sold to the British public, right? Sure. Everybody looks at the NHS and they think, oh, it's free at the point of view, so it's great. But every year the government wants to put the budget up. Well, you start to look at where the budget is going. Okay, it's going on tourism, healthcare tourism, people coming into the country to get, and then it's going on, you know, things like, well, everything has to have a translator. And you have to have translators for everyone from all over the world. So you have to have Somali translators and, you know, Aramaic translators, you know, all this crazy stuff that's going. And then you have translation on every piece of paper, which obviously when you're doing healthcare things is a lot of paperwork. So you think about the hundreds of millions of pounds that are spent every year just furnishing the foreign population with a healthcare system that is paid for by the British taxpayer. If you run a country like that, you will no longer have a country. And we are on the precipice of no longer having a country.
Well, the Reform Party is trying to fix that. Now, the King is literally going to be speaking very soon. So I know we have a couple of clips. So let's get to those because you and I need to get in position to see your King.
Allahu Akbar.
Now, if you had asked me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and I have an affinity for the UK. You know, my family's heritage can be traced back to the northern part of England on the borderland there with Scotland, the Northumberland region. Beyond that, you know, it's kind of interesting for the kids to see where their family came from. But if you'd asked me, would you ever have mass prayer in one of the, you know, the largest cities in the UK that was Islamic, I would have kind of scoffed. I mean, when I think of the UK, I think of where my family came from, and for many, quite frankly, U.S., you know, the founders and the settlers who came to this country, and to see it having been overrun, essentially, this, I would argue, illegal migration that was forced upon Europe by the EU, by the globalists and the socialists and the Marxists, because they do want to change culture. They have imported people. Again, you know, when you see I've seen videos, and you can't make this stuff up, where you know, they're from North Africa and they've just tried to sexually assault a 12, 13, 14-year-old girl, and their excuse or defense when, you know, Brits surround them and save the child is, that this is acceptable in my country. I didn't know better.
Right.
Well, if you're importing people that don't know better and don't want to get a job and don't want to be a part of your community and your culture, then get the hell out.
Right.
You know, I joke, you know, before we got on, I said, you know, we've got our own migration issues and deportation issues that we're dealing with here. But, you know, we could make, I'm joking, UK the 51st state. I'll be the governor and I'll just deport them all. And we'll save the UK.
Can I be Attorney General?
Well, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I mean, I think about it all the time. You go to certain parts of, and I did for that book, right? You go to certain parts of England and you can't believe you're in England. You know, England. When you think of England, you should think of Shakespeare and Henry VIII, and, you know, more contemporaneously, maybe Mr. Bean or Harry Potter or something, right? You shouldn't have to think about Muhammad raping a 9-year-old.
That's right.
You know, but that is what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. I don't mean that rhetorically. I mean that literally.
Yes.
I want people to understand just how horrendous the situation is. And even though, yes, a lot of the people who are perpetrators of those grooming gangs 20, 30 years ago have now gone to prison, that isn't to say that those communities are all right now. It's not been fixed. The problem has not been resolved because, and look, a lot of people, I think, watching this, we're going, fine, you're telling us what's happening. Why is it happening? You know, who is behind all of this stuff? Well, I think you're smart enough to know where it really comes from, right? It comes from globalism, the people who promote globalism, because they think that open borders are the answer to everything, and they think that you can, you know, And Bush actually had a good line for it: the soft bigotry of low expectations, of people who come in who don't know any better, right?
Yeah.
We think you can do all of that. And I got to tell you, I think we're on the precipice of the Nigel Farage and the Reform Party taking over at the next general election, already plans for mass deportations, already plans for a British version of ICE, and actually setting the country back on the right track. It will take time.
Sure.
It will take 20, 30 years to get it right.
Overnight,
Exactly.
right?
They won't fix it overnight.
Do we have a second clip, or are we finished?
We can do a second. Yeah.
All right, second clip, and then we've got to go.
Yeah.
And
We are
it's
not
probably
going anywhere. This is our country. We are here to stay. We are settlers. And also, I would like to point out that some people said, what about the crucifix on the English flag? And it's Crusader history. Well, I responded, if you place a white flag with just England written on that flag, there is no reason in Sharia Islamic law why that would be forbidden. So you are permitted to place a white flag with England written on it without the crucifix.
Erase the crucifix.
That's right.
That's what he
I
said.
mean, their words, not ours, right? You know, and again, in his words, that is a warning what's happening across Europe. It's happening in the UK, and again, this is something that I track closely. You see these, literally the mass rape across Europe, and we're seeing it now in cities across the United States. And so my warning to my constituents and the people that will see this is, we've got the data. I've shared with you the data that what we've seen in London, Paris, and Sweden, and Rome, what we've seen across Europe. We have some of the data from the U.S. Where crime is on the rise, specifically in these communities. And if we don't wake up, that's what we're going to have here. And we do. And again, I'm going to go back to the 4 terrorist attacks. I gave the imams and the mosques in the United States of America to do the right thing and condemn the violence and disavow the attackers. And they did not, because their silence is louder than anything that I might say or anything that you have told us that, quite frankly, is truth. And so with that, thank you for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
For being on the show, introducing you and really your roots, and just showing that there is a connection between the U.S. and the U.K. and that our shared history and our shared values mean something. And also, again, credit to you. I mean, you were part of Breitbart, and you're part of Bannon, and the Tea Party
I'm
movement.
old now.
Yeah,
I've been around.
But you were there in the beginning,
Yeah.
and so a true patriot. And through those movements, we've become friends, dear friend. And so it's an honor to take you to this event this afternoon, this evening, to see King Charles. And with that, God bless you. This is Congressman Andy Ogles coming at you live from the U.S. Capitol. We have a big event with King Charles speaking. Probably means more to my friend from the U.K. than it does to me, because we won after all. But with that, God bless you. Be safe, and God bless America.
If you try to transition a child, you are